The events that have led me to believe this started right after we moved. I was about 12 at the time, and they've always been fairly tame. It started out as just a weird tapping. It has this weird, almost musical rhythm to it that just made it seem a little too natural to be ignored. The first time I heard this, I was incredibly freaked out. I would turn on my bedside lamp as fast as possible and sit on my bed, scanning the room for any movement. I'd crawl to the edges of the bed to look all around my room, and then, after steeling myself internally, quickly throw my head upside down to check under the bed. Always nothing. But this would do pretty much nothing to make me feel better. The immediate fear of there's nothing in my room sort of transmuted into a more ambiguous, I don't understand what's happening. This would become an uncomfortable nagging feeling in my head as I would try to settle back down to sleep, and I always got the distinct impression that I was being toyed with, like whatever was there enjoyed watching me go through this ritual every time. This was further reinforced by the fact that the tapping never occurs when the lights are on, only when they're off, and really only in those first few moments after you turn the lights off and before your eyes have a chance to adjust. The room just becomes pitch black darkness, and every scary image you'd ever seen in your life would burn into your eyes and appear whenever you look in the black void. That's always when the noise would happen. So I would hear the noise, do my room checking routine, eventually settle back into bed, turn off the light, and then repeat it all again. It scared me so much that more often than not in those early days, I would end up sitting up on my bed with the light on and my back against the wall until eventually I would be so exhausted I would fall asleep. But that got old, so I started trying to figure it out once and for all. After I'd hear it, I'd turn the light on, as before, but then I would turn it back off and wait with my hand on the switch. Once I heard it again, I would turn the light back on. The longer I left the light on for, the louder and more intense the noise would become, and I would hear it move around the room. It would start in different places all the time, but when it moved, it would always make its way to the end of my bed, on the side I always slept on, and then start to come up towards me. Eventually, it would come up right next to my bed, becoming almost ridiculously loud. I would always turn the light on then. I wasn't curious enough to see what would happen. The instant the room was illuminated, the noise would stop. Every single time. I also discovered that if I made a noise, like talking or slamming my head on the bed, it would stop. I found this comforting at first, like it was scared of me, or maybe just actually a rather polite ghost. But soon, a thought formed in my mind, one that would crop back up whenever I would find myself being a little bit afraid of the noise again. It's waiting until I'm asleep. This was all very scary at the start, but after a while had gone by and I hadn't been killed or possessed, I just sort of got over it. And that's how it's been for years now. The noise sometimes happens. I usually just smack the bed or tell it to shut up, and that's that. No big deal. I believe that the room is haunted, but it really doesn't matter that much. Until recently. There had actually been quite a long stretch where I hadn't heard the noise at all. It hadn't really left my mind, but I wasn't actively thinking about it. So when this started happening, it struck me more than it had in a long while. My boyfriend was staying over, and he's one of those blessed people who falls asleep easily and is incredibly hard to wake up. So, as per usual, he fell asleep way before I did. This was all normal, and I lay there for a while, trying to fall asleep, until suddenly something changed. A feeling of fear and unease seeped into me. The darkness around me went from being warm and comforting to cold and menacing. I found myself tensing up and focusing my eyes intently on different spots around the room. All of a sudden, the noise started again, but different than before. Before, it had been quick and somewhat playful. Now it was much slower and undoubtedly sinister. like a war drum. My eyes came to rest on one spot, as if something had drawn them there, and then the darkness coalesced into a moving shape. It was like water, or a droplet of water, falling into a puddle in slow motion. It rose slowly, becoming thinner in the center the higher it went, until it stopped completely. I stared at it in a confused state of fear for a moment before it filled into the shape of a person, long and gaunt. From the darkness of its face, 2 eyes glowed slowly to life, like those energy-saving light bulbs. They were a blinding white, with a vague, warm orange aura around their edges. Its gaze was fixed on me, and never in my life had I felt such a primal terror. I felt as though I were caught in a web, watching the spider creep toward me in slow motion. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my head into my boyfriend's back. I was literally shaking with fear, but like I said, he's a heavy sleeper, so he didn't wake up, and I was left quaking in the dark, expecting to feel a hand fall on me at any minute. But it never did, and at some point, I actually managed to fall asleep. I didn't mention anything the next day because I wanted to convince myself it was a dream, and I pretty much managed to pull that off. That is, until the next night. Much as the same as the first night, I felt that uneasy feeling, and in the hopes of avoiding what had happened before, I squeezed my eyes shut as hard as I could. I kept them shut for a long time, until eventually I decided that I should face my fear and look, show myself that I was freaking myself out because of a dream I'd had. I saw the room as it was supposed to look, could just about make out the features of the space with my eyes adjusted in the dark, and I saw that the space where the thing had been the night before was empty. I relaxed for about a quarter of a second before the same strange motion began. The second I saw that, I shut my eyes, and I didn't open them until I eventually fell asleep. The next night, I didn't even attempt to face my fear. As soon as the feeling settled over me, I closed my eyes for the rest of the night, which took all my willpower. And that brings me to today, when I'm writing this. I'm not sure what this thing is or what's going on. Is it even the same presence I've always suspected in my room? Is it something else? Perhaps someone else might know, and I'd almost be content with that. So far, this thing hasn't actually done anything. Maybe he's just a bit of a nosy guy. I really want to believe that, but I can't bring myself to. And there's another problem. My boyfriend is leaving today, and I'm terrified of what might happen when I go to sleep tonight. I want to just stay up, but I know I can't stay awake indefinitely. I need a solution, or at least some advice. If there's anyone that can offer something like that, please share. At this time of year where I live, the sun doesn't set until late, about 10 or 11. I still have a few good hours until then. I suppose I should try to enjoy it while I can.